Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Crossing Boundaries, Building a Curriculum for Library Publishing. My name is Sarah Lippincott. I am with the UMass Amherst Libraries. I'm going to be the moderator for this very unscripted conversation with Peter Berkery, the Executive Director of the Association of University Presses, Mary Rose Musey, Executive Director and Scholarly Communications Officer at Temple University Press, and Kate Pitcher, Director of the Library at St. Mary's College of Maryland, and one of the advisory board members on this project. So, how many in this room are generally familiar with library publishing and what that means? Okay, so you probably know then that a lot of librarians taking on publishing roles at their organizations don't come into those roles with a formal publishing background, with training in publishing, or with previous work experience in publishing. And we know that a lot of publishing skills are learned on the job in this kind of apprenticeship model. And so we have librarians who have come in as scholarly communications officers or as metadata librarians, as institutional repository managers, suddenly finding themselves building publishing programs, often open access journal publishing programs, in some cases monograph publishing programs, and kind of everything in between, all of the gray literature, digital humanities projects, and data set publishing. And there's this big gap between the skills that they learned in library school, the skills that they've learned on the job as librarians, and the skills that they need and the knowledge that they need to fulfill these emerging roles as publishers. So in 2014, the Library Publishing Coalition received a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to build something that would help bridge that gap. We know that demands for library publishing services are continuing to grow, but tailored training opportunities in the area are scarce. Opportunities that are tailored to librarians, both in terms of the focus of the content and in terms of how that content is delivered and made available to professionals. The inspiration for this project came out of the Library Publishing Coalition's membership, just listening to people's concerns that they were unprepared or that their staff were unprepared, or that they needed more robust training opportunities. And then more specifically, the project developed through a research study that we did in the spring of 2014, or we started doing this study in 2013, in which we tried to get a sense from library deans and press directors who are working in libraries of what the 21st century skills that publishers were going to need, both the hard skills, the technology skills, and the soft skills and kind of values that they want their staff to have. And so from this groundwork, we proposed to IMLS building a training that would address that would be delivered in two ways. First, kind of short-term, lightweight, lower investment training mechanisms that would teach in-demand practices and hard skills. And then longer-term, more structured, higher investment educational programs that would teach the soft skills and inculcate values that fluctuate less rapidly. So those are the things like the kind of the customer service aspect of publishing, working with building author and editor relationships, those kinds of things, versus the hard skills, like the technology and metadata skills, the publishing workflows. So we received funding from IMLS, the Library Publishing Coalition, and the Educopia Institute, its parent organization, served as the PIs on the project. And then, as you can see, we called this session Crossing Boundaries for a reason. We have a constellation of organizations and individuals who were involved in putting this curriculum together. That was a very deliberate decision to open this up and make it a community-based resource and a cross-sector resource. So we had content provided by authors, teams of authors in most cases, who were hired through grant funding. They came from the Mason Publishing Group at George Mason University, from the University of Florida, from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a team from that came together under the auspices of the Association of University Presses that included representatives from Temple University, Stanford University, a number of other organizations to pick their own brains and start to translate and put on paper all of the knowledge and skills that they had around library publishing. And we had a consultant, Nancy Marin from Blue Sky to Blueprint, who worked with the authors as a kind of instructional designer to make sure that these modules were incorporating good pedagogical strategies. And then I came on later in the project to do some of the kind of final cleanup, make sure all of the different units and modules we prepared were interlinking to one another, that they all had a kind of similar style and tone over time. And finally, we are partnering with both NASIG and the Public Knowledge Project on the dissemination aspect. So these are just, and I should say the review piece also included an open peer review and comment period that garnered comments from many different organizations. And this spring, we released the first 3 modules of this curriculum. As you can see, they're all released just on Google Drive. This is that lightweight, kind of lower investment, just getting this knowledge out there quickly to people in a form that's open and accessible. So we have a module on content. That's all of the editorial processes. How does content get from point A to point B in the publishing process? Impact, which is all about measuring and evaluating how our publishing programs are having an effect at our institutions and beyond. And sustainability, which is focused on both financial aspects of publishing and preservation. And this spring, we also piloted teaching the workshops for the first time at the Library Publishing Forum. And one of our pilot instructors is actually in the room today. And we saw some good results already in terms of seeing these curricular materials available in practice. So we're lucky to have with us today, as I said, two authors, Peter Berkery and Mary Rose, who worked on the content module, and Kate Pitcher, who was a member of our advisory board. And so this is going to be, an open conversation. I have a few questions for them to get us started, but I would welcome questions from all of you as well. So I want to start by asking the panel, what to you makes this curriculum important? What's the need for this?
Rock, paper, scissors.
Right, yeah. How about I'll start from the library perspective. So prior to coming to St. Mary's College, I was at the State University of New York at Geneseo, where we were doing a lot of work in monograph publishing, open access books, as well as starting several different open educational resources pilot projects. And so for us, I think, looking back from the perspective I have now, at the time, if we'd had a curriculum such as the one that the LPC put together, I think it would have made the startup process much more streamlined for us. It was a very rocky few years there, where we were trying to develop those skills within our professional staff to be able to publish materials with quality. That was a particular struggle for us. We were able to find staff members who actually came with publishing experience in their backgrounds. So that, of course, helped us out a lot. But we also realized that the librarians who were interested in this area did not have the skills. They weren't getting them in the graduate programs that they were taking. So I think for libraries, especially if libraries with smaller staffs, who want to undertake, even if a small publishing program, having a curriculum, an open source curriculum such as this is a really good way to just get started. And that's sort of my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would add that I think publishing is one of those things that on the surface looks kind of easy, right? You get the content, you do some copy editing, you fix the punctuation, you hire a printer, and boom, you're good to go. But it's as you were just saying, there's a certain level of skill and certain very specific skills that are needed to do it well, to do it in a way that makes your author happy, makes your user happy, gets your content found. And one of the things the curriculum does, I think, is break down those areas where there are skills needed, or even different ways of thinking, in kind of manageable chunks, and lets a library publishing program participant look at it and say, this is where I need, to really bolster my knowledge, and this is something I don't know. And, my opinion of the curriculum is that because it takes a broad view of what makes publishing and what makes publishing successful, and allows the user, the instructor, the student to take from it exactly what they need, it makes it really unique in that way. It's, you can customize it to what you need and, what your particular situation is.
So I'm not really sure that there's much more that I can add to what's been said. Maybe I can just offer a little perspective on why it was the project was attractive to the association. And let me quickly add that I feel a bit of a fraud sitting here next to Mary Rose and pretending like I did any work on this project, because Mary Rose, we had a pretty large team, at least compared to the other 3 of the original suite of modules that was initially produced. And Mary Rose really was the glue that held the group together, and more importantly, perhaps, the individual who picked up the slack when the other members of the group were too focused on their day jobs to meet a deadline. So it's really embarrassing to be sitting this close to the person who actually did all the work and feigning responsibility for the finished product. But I can do it. So the things that were attractive to us are at least in my 5 years with AU Presses, we've been pretty intensely focused on how university presses can demonstrate value to the academy in general, to our colleagues in the academy, in particular to the 146 provosts or provost-like people who determine our institutional budget allocations, and therefore, for many of us, our financial health on a go-forward basis. The particular model that we signed up for, content, we felt really played to our core strengths as publishers. And then finally, I will say, we thought that it was important to reaffirm our support for the library publishing community. AU Presses has been a supporter of LPC since shortly after it was founded. And in fact, I think I gave the closing keynote at the first annual Library Publishing Forum. So we just thought that this was, in addition to the other 2 reasons, we just thought that this was a really good opportunity to further our ties to our colleagues in the academy.
So I have a kind of a related question. I think, Mary Rose, you gestured toward this a little bit in your remarks. So, we had these quite large teams in some cases, especially for the content unit or module. Can you talk about how about the challenges of kind of that logistically, but also the challenges of how do you go about distilling and encapsulating all of this knowledge, much of which is learned on the job and is kind of experiential yeah. into something that you can translate and teach someone in a classroom setting?
I think the biggest challenge for our team was getting the level of detail right. And I'm not sure, and Charlotte can actually speak to this since she taught a couple of the units. I'm not sure that we did. You know, there are so many details in publishing. Every process has 5,000 sub-processes that have 7,000 sub-processes. And it was really difficult to know what level to hit here. Because you can tell yourself, well, you don't know how to do this until you also know how to do that, but then that's dependent on this. That was really difficult. I mean, Sarah, you know, because you did the final edit, I think we were successful in some ways and not successful in others, and knowing where to come into a topic was hard too. The challenge with the team was, you know, Peter alluded to it, you know, everybody was busy. You know, we had, there were 3 press directors on the team, Peter, and then 2 very senior people from Stanford. And so, you know, you had your day job and you had a lot to do. So the scheduling was tricky. I think, too, none of us were experienced in instructional design. And we did have really good models to follow, forms that Nancy had created that the LPC worked on. But even so, we weren't instructional designers. And we didn't have, for the most part, I think I can say we didn't have curricular roles in our institutions as well. So I think that was challenging too. You know, pulling it together, hitting the right tone, hitting the right level, and the right amount of detail.
I think one other really kind of tactical challenge, and Sarah, you'll probably appreciate it because you had to do it across the 4 modules, was with the team of authors as large as the one we had, there was an essential final step, which Brenna mostly did, which was taking 7 voices and making them sound like one. And, you know, and then Sarah had to do that with the 4 voices that she got from us and the other 3 modules. But, you know, anybody who's ever published an edited collection knows what that's like.
Kate, do you have anything to add?
I don't think I have anything to add to that. It's hard work.
So, Peter, you mentioned AUP's interest in this and kind of showing support for the library publishing community. And, you know, I think this and this is a question for everyone, but, you know, maybe you can start off. Is this curriculum appropriate for other kinds of publishers as well? Is this useful in a university press setting or in you know, a small society publisher? In what other kinds of environments might this be useful?
Yeah, so Mary Rose, I'd be interested to see if you agree with this or you can add to it. But I think the short answer to that is probably yes. I think that a small society without a publishing program who's contemplating one, which is contemplating one, certainly could benefit from using it. For folks, possibly for folks just entering a publishing career. I know, for example, that John Warren has said in other fora that he's used elements of the curriculum in the class he teaches. George Washington University in DC offers a master's in publishing, and I think probably about half of our DC members are adjuncts teaching at it. And it's been useful there. So I think, yeah, it is leverageable.
I also wonder, too, if scholars who serve as journal editors or are thinking of starting their own journals, maybe not affiliated with their library publishing, you know, a library publishing program or something like that, might find aspects of this at least good information to know, something to think about, whether they implement it or not. It's, you know, it's always hard to know with a scholar, but I think there is value there, right? You know, well, it's true. You never know. But I think there's information there that they might find useful. I would agree, too, that students, just in general, who are interested in publishing as a career, this would be a nice, it's larger than a snapshot, but, you know, it would be a nice entree into what's actually involved. What are the aspects of publishing that they never think about, the legal aspects? Like, who thinks about that?
So I want to sort of piggyback on that because that's actually of particular interest to me, working at an undergraduate institution where when I was at Geneseo, we had developed a very robust student internship program within the library, and part of that internship program was the development of internships for students who were interested in publishing. So they worked directly with our digital publishing specialist, she crafted, publishing internships for them, which makes me think that a curriculum like this would have gone a long way towards helping her sort of make that experience. You talked about experiential learning before. In higher ed, especially in liberal arts, I know at my institution, applied learning for students and experiential learning, apprenticeships, this type of internship learning is sort of the buzzword right now. And so for me, thinking about this curriculum, I do wonder if this is a moment of opportunity for us to work closely with our English department colleagues in the English department and other departments who, I know for instance, we have half a dozen faculty across campus who help student-run journals. And so what a great opportunity to work with, a collaboration between maybe a university press nearby and the institution and the journal editors and the students to maybe develop a program or some sort of curriculum for students to learn hands-on. I know especially at my location, I'm very remote. I'm down in southern Maryland, and we're about an hour and a half from DC. So it's not easy for the students to get up to internships in DC. So we have to think about what we can do locally, and we have a large population of students who are very interested in writing and publishing. So I know for me, that's a particular interest.
I love your comment, Mary Rose, about having journal editors or potential journal editors, look at these things directly, and kind of one of the major goals of the curriculum was not just to teach skills, but to have a package of some model documentation and model workflows and all of the tools that people would need to implement a publishing program or to get them started in thinking about, here's a checklist that we go through with all our journal editors. Here's a copyright statement that someone else has used. And that was one of the advantages of this being community-built and community-driven initiative, was that we had all of these resources to pull from, all of the organizations who developed their own local materials that we are now aggregating and distributing more broadly.
One of the things I was thinking of as we were working on these modules, just the whole group, was that, consistency in approaches, in, documentation, in, forms and procedures and processes, consistency breeds legitimacy, right? Even if you're a library publishing program, an individual library publishing program at a particular school, if you approach projects differently each time, you're not necessarily adding a level of professionalism and legitimacy to your program, and you're also making it a heck of a lot harder on yourself. So I think that this program goes a long way toward showing you how you can be consistent from project to project, whether it's an open educational resource, an open textbook, a student-run journal.
Yeah. And so I completely agree that professionalization, having processes and workflows in place is so important for publishers who are just getting started. Can you talk also about how in the curriculum you approached kind of helping publishers then define their own identity though within that, and making sure that they were addressing kind of local, building local value, building programs that were informed by the local context?
I'm not sure we certainly tried very hard to do that. I'm not sure how successful we were. We made a point of characterizing different kinds of programs as ones that were responsive to needs of the institution, their local community, going out, talking to faculty and students to find out what they were doing, how they might need support or benefit from support, and then programs that actually decided to actively develop an editorially driven strategy. I think we had a little bit of trouble actually balancing those two, while recognizing that making sure at the heart of it, no matter what, you had to be serving an identified need. One of the things we're actually dealing with right now at Temple is we actually just, I would say, launched a joint press library imprint, except we haven't published anything, so can we launch it without publishing? But North Broad Press, and you know, it's one of those chicken and egg things right now. You know, there's lots of stuff that on campus faculty are talking about, oh, well, you know, I've been thinking about taking my lecture notes and turning them into da-da-da-da. But when the rubber hits the road and you go to them and say, great, we can do that for you, they're like, oh, well, wait a minute. So, and I'm always interested to know if other library publishing programs deal with this, because, of course, we hear about so many successes.
So I may know too much about how the sausage was made, but I think you might be being just a little too hard on yourself. My sense of how we approached the question is that, you know, because a local context is local, we can't answer that. I think what we tried to do was identify points in the curriculum where we needed to say, if there's a local context, you know, or here's a spot where there could be a local context, step back and think about it.
True.
I definitely think your question like resonated with me, because I know there are so many faculty who just think, oh, this lecture would be perfect if I just turned it into a book, and it's like, no, it doesn't exactly work that way. And even, you know, even as a library publisher, I can recognize that that's not a necessarily good use of it. That's where I think instructional designers are really key to the process, especially, and this is a very specific example I'm giving, it like within open educational resources, but it's so important to have good instructional designers, librarians, and publishers working together, because that textbook or that content is more than just a physical book. It may also be lesson plans and all this content that goes together and is delivered in different ways. So I think the editorial strategy is really important at the very beginning, even with a library publisher, and especially with faculty and textbooks.
So there are a lot of different types of publishing education and professional development. There are degrees, as Peter mentioned. There are workshops at places like SSP or AUP conference. And you know, there's all sorts of ways that people can build their skills, both hard skills and soft skills related to publishing. Can you all talk a little bit about what you think makes this particular set of curricular materials different from those?
So two thoughts, just random, occur to me. One is I feel like there's a good bit of rigor in the creation and structure of the course. And so I think that it is probably, how to even say it? I think it's both different and potentially better, to use a judgy word, because of the rigor in the process that went into its creation. And I think the other thing that's different about it is it was constructed with academic values in mind as opposed to commercial values. And so I think it reflects the values of the academy in ways that sometimes are in tension with the values of commercial publishers. And I think for library publishers and probably for society publishers, that's important.
And I would say also at the same time, though, it's, I believe it paints a realistic picture of what's involved in publishing and the challenges and the things that you need to consider. You know, when you're creating a contract that you're going to, potentially use with an author. You have to clearly lay out what you're doing, what they're doing. It's things that you need to think about. And I do think that balance that it strikes between, the values of the academy and the realities of running what is essentially a business operation may make this unique as well.
The only things I would add to all of that is that it's free online. That's a huge one.
Well, that's the values of the academy.
Right, the values of the academy, right.
Because no university cares about money.
Right. But I would additionally say that the fact that it can be sort of implemented in different ways, right? It could be a self-guided course that an individual might go through. It could be led by an instructor or a workshop or held online. So there's lots of variability in delivery of the curriculum. So I think that's pretty unique too.
I think that focus on the academic values, there's definitely an emphasis on open access and digital publishing models throughout, though not exclusively. I think it's relatively agnostic in terms of what your actual publishing program's business model looks like. But definitely a focus on it, OA, focus on digital. And I think there was also a deliberate effort on behalf of the advisory board to make sure that that authors also emphasized diversity and inclusion, the kind of ethical and social justice aspects that a lot of library publishers are infusing into their programs. And I think that successfully came out in a lot of the modules. How are we manifesting our commitment to diversity and inclusion through our publishing work?
I have a question.
Yeah. Let me bring you a mic.
I'm not exactly clear on the delivery method of this curriculum. You had mentioned self-paced. You've also mentioned the workshops, and you've mentioned putting it into classes in a graduate program. I'm at a small university in the middle of nowhere, and we're a victim of our own success, and I need all this information last year. How do I get it?
Well, I can answer that, and I can also pull up the URL of where these modules are available online. So they're all available through Google Drive. The way they're presented is just a series of documents with hyperlinks to videos or other material that's available on the web. Some that include other supplementary material as part of the package, as part of the folder on Google Drive. So they're meant to be kind of self-contained, and they're meant to be something, each module, each unit of each module contains an instructor guide that an instructor or a learner could use to kind of scaffold the instructional experience. A narrative that kind of is the textbook chapter explanation of that unit's major concepts, and then typically a variety of appendices. Some might be activity worksheets, and a slide deck as well, that again kind of goes through the major concepts of the unit. It is, yeah. I think they're definitely set up and probably optimal for an instructor-led program, either in person or online. But it certainly still would be valuable to and usable by an individual person for self-study. There will be a virtual implementation. I think there are going to be 2 different courses taught this summer, and they're not going to be MOOCs, they're going to be smaller virtual courses where students can get individual attention from the instructor. But I think, it's an interesting question. I'd love to hear the panelists' thought, and maybe especially Kate as one of the advisory board members, on kind of what are the future directions, what are next steps, what would you like to see emerge next from this project?
Oh, that's a heavy question. Yeah, I suppose a MOOC could be an appropriate use. I know that in the library community, I know Kevin Smith has done some successful ones on copyright that have worked really well for librarians. So it's possible that a publishing one similar to this could work. I definitely agree that I think the sort of smaller scale or more individualized attention where an instructor could lead a smaller group would be really beneficial. I myself am working with a couple staff members at my institution to lead like a small student group to do that in our campus, in our library. So as far as future, I think there's all types of combinations that could happen with the curriculum. But I definitely could foresee there being some sort of online course offered, whether it's through LPC or, which seems like a natural place, but.
Or even an iSchool.
Or yeah, an iSchool. Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a future there somewhere.
I think also you'll see, if you take a look at it, you'll see that a lot of the units have exercises and activities built in. So while it is absolutely true that it can be self-guided, there is the narrative, there is the instructor's guide, there are the learning objectives. There's a bibliography for each unit, and in some cases, case studies, all of which you can really, I think, dig into on your own. There is this opportunity, if you do it in a group, to have these discussions around exercises and activities.
And so I'm having trouble pulling up the site, but oh, okay, great. Great. Okay, if you're on Twitter. But yeah, I should have thought to put up the URL on my slides as well. But if you go to educopia.org or librarypublishing.org, you can find the materials through there. And as I said, they're in a publicly accessible Google Drive folder that's linked from there.
I wanted to thank you on behalf of myself and other librarians who find themselves in the same role as me. I'm Institutional Repositories Librarian at the University of Toronto, which means NIR plus about 40 OJS journals. And we've been intentionally steering clear from calling ourselves library publishers in favor of library hosting service, partially because of human resources issue. I'm alone, U of T is the largest university in Canada, but also because of lack of expertise, which I think is the gap that your course will fill brilliantly. And I was also interested about the MOOC question, so I got beat to that. Another option, I think, is PKP has been really successful in building those modular video courses that I think this would be a great fit for, if this is something that they would consider. But my other question is, I would be super interested in any documentation or write-up about the methodology you followed when creating these modules, these courses, including contracting with authors, conducting peer review, organizing instructional design, because now it's occurring to me that the same methodology could probably be translated into creating a modular course like that on other aspects where librarians find themselves kind of outside of the traditional library realm, like a repository work or other things. So I would be super curious if you could share something like that. Thank you.
So do you want me to summarize kind of?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was, a suggestion to write up the kind of methodology of how we built this, and that kind of, in that the methodology of building this open educational resources could actually be applicable to other areas of emerging areas in librarianship. And there was also a comment about the kind of the skills gap and kind of being a journal hosting service versus a library publisher.
I can address that. There is a open education scholarly communications textbook that's being written, and they're very much in the early stages, but they have grants. So if that's what you're referring to. Great. Sorry to preempt. I wanted to comment really quickly because I'm Charlotte and I taught last week from the curriculum. It is incredibly helpful. As someone who worked so in my first year in publishing, they sent me to a copy editing class for a semester, and I was the last year to be sent and paid for. After that, they didn't offer any sort of formal training for any editorial assistants. So definitely there's a huge training gap. And also, like, I went to like multiple young publishing, like panels and things, and everyone was complaining because the shift to email had meant that the apprenticeship of publishing had really fallen by the wayside, and everybody just felt like admin, right? And I think that still persists, where the apprenticeship element of publishing in general, not just library publishing, but presses, not everybody's CC'd on emails. A lot of it is author management, the delicacy of that, and like context, right, for each situation and problem solving. And this curriculum really, from the library publishing side and the traditional publishing side, I will say it's an amazing resource. And even if it's not enough to self-teach, it's like a great orientation to some of the topics that are covered. That's my little plug.
Thank you. Thank you.
Partial website.
Yeah. Yeah, so the website's kind of partially up. There's also, I should also mention that so there were the 2 workshops that we taught at the Library Publishing Forum, and there will be additional ones that we'll do at other library conferences. So there's one planned for the DLF conference, and I think there may be one other. So we'll continue to do these at events where librarians already are, hopefully, and people who have an interest. Yeah, another question.
Yeah, this is really just more of a comment to say thank you for this curriculum. I'm at Emory University. We don't have a university press or a formal library publishing program there, but another area where I'm thinking this could potentially be useful and where I'm hoping to try it out a little bit is in a digital scholarship center where we're talking about digital publishing quite a lot and using that terminology. Our digital scholarship center is a place where faculty come when they have an idea for a digital humanities project, but very often they're kind of looking forward and to perhaps some kind of formal publication outside the center. But I think there's a pretty big gap sometimes in the terminology between, what a center like that can mean, the people working in it, between just hitting a publish button in a CMS versus the publishing process. And so I think this could actually be a really nice entree for that. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is that at Emory, there are some very specific initiatives going on right now to work with graduate students, PhDs in the humanities. And in fact, there's a Mellon grant that's actually called Interventions. So it's trying to help these graduate students think about alternatives to the traditional tenure track market, because we know that's a pretty tough road right now. So I'm wondering if that might also be something that we can use to reach out to the graduate students and let them know about this other potential career path. So I think there's actually quite a lot of other uses for the curriculum, and we'll try out some of them at Emory. So thanks.
Actually, that's a really good idea, and one of the actually related to what Peter said about iSchools is this idea of certificate programs that might be a possible way for which maybe postmasters in publishing or postmasters in librarianship, there's some sort of combined digital publishing certificate that, of course, that's another added expense that you. But I know, like, with all the talk about digital badging and credentialing and all of this, is there, there might be a future there for the curriculum to have some sort of potential, there might be a certificate program of some sort that would be useful.
The Digital Scholarship Center idea is really interesting. I know at Temple, our DSC, a lot of the projects, they're very, they tend to be sort of personality driven, by the faculty member who has the idea or who has gotten the fellowship or, things like that. And they're very much one-offs, they're not necessarily, the technical infrastructure is replicable, but beyond that, not so much of it is. And I do think there are definitely aspects to some of these modules, some units, that would definitely apply there. And it'd be interesting to see how, I'm just thinking in our particular case, the DSC there's an editorial, academic director who's actually an English tenured professor. And then the rest of it is their librarian staff who are techies, and then a bunch of grad students, and we have a clear fellow. And I can see the clear fellow really sort of digging her teeth into this and trying to figure out how to incorporate it into what they do there. Really interesting idea. Thank you.
Your comment about consistency breeds legitimacy. Your comment about consistency breeding legitimacy really hit home, because I think that's actually one of the issues with faculty coming into the center, is that there's not a clear expectation always of how that process is going to go. And even those individual projects are very faculty driven by their own timelines, and that causes problems on both sides. So I think I can take that little phrase back with me and kind of use that to introduce some of these, more editorially driven approach. To even just dealing with any DH project.
Absolutely.
Actually, yeah.
Do we, just speaking of the future plans for the curriculum, do we know kind of what modules are on deck for next?
So there's one that's still under construction, hasn't been released, that's on policy. So all aspects of, there's units on copyright policy, on submission guidelines, those kinds of, how do we document our guidelines and policies as publishers. But otherwise, there aren't specific units planned, and part of that is we're going through an evaluation process of how these work in practice, and kind of seeing what the experience of the students and instructors are as they start to use the materials, and kind of figure out what might be missing or what we might need next. But it is very much designed to be a community effort, and it is designed to be built upon like any open source project by the community. So I think it's definitely something the LPC is interested in encouraging, is if a group wanted to spontaneously write a unit on a topic that was particularly important to them, then that could be something that could kind of grow, that this curriculum could grow to incorporate other educational materials that other
Does the grant contemplate any more modules?
No, no.
Yeah, I'm just, because in my head I'm thinking, gosh, that would have been helpful when we were doing TEI markup.
Right.
To have a curriculum for
Right.
that, because that would sort of fly by the seat of your pants, and it would talk about no consistency whatsoever. I'm just thinking in terms of digital scholarship, there's so many the new technical languages, the markup languages. There's a lot of potential for a future phase 2 or something like that.
And these more kind of granular,
Yes,
very specific skills that kind of drill down from the more, these materials aren't really introductory, because they're deeper than that, but they don't go into, how do you actually do XML markup? They just plant that idea in your head that that's something you might want to learn about. that's part of a publishing workflow. And I think one of the strengths of the curriculum, and your comment about the digital scholarship, its application for digital scholarship centers made me think about this, is that it's designed to, in some cases, give guidance and give best practices, but in a lot of cases, it's giving the framework for thinking about these decisions. So there's a unit on digital preservation, and instead of saying like this is how you do digital preservation, it's presenting a framework for how do you as a publisher balance innovation and sustainability when you're working with faculty on these innovative digital projects. So we want to give people the tools to think through these issues locally with experts on their campus and make decisions that work for their programs, but make sure that they're thinking about the right things. And so I have a follow-up question, though, along the lines of this conversation for the audience, actually, about what you think the most important skills are going to be for 21st century publishers, and especially for those based in libraries. And what should we be thinking about next for what we should incorporate into this curriculum?
I'm in the throes of trying to get our journals into the directory of open access journals.
Yeah.
Then there's a set of requirements for ERIC that are separate. I just heard about Scopus recently. How do we get our journals into the databases that we know people are searching other than just Google Scholar? Yeah. That would be very helpful, especially the process for DOAJ. It's just so many particular steps and things, and I can't, push that work off on the editors to create all those policies and everything because it won't get done. They're excited about articles of publishing and not retraction policies.
Yeah. I can recommend a recent Library Publishing Coalition webinar on that topic of DOAJ. So yeah, I recommend visiting I think all the webinars are archived on the website. Yeah.
Is there someone over here?
Yeah.
I'm thinking along the lines of data publishing and expanding into formats that are beyond just article publishing.
Yeah.
Preprints, data reports, protocols, and all sorts of surrounding things.
Yeah.
I was just going to mention, as I understand it, a colleague of mine is on the Library Publishing Coalition's DOAJ task force, and they're actually working through some documentation to help that very problem because it is rather a daunting application. So I know that's in process, so some hope for the future. I'm not sure if this is covered, but I certainly think project management is a huge aspect of my day-to-day business, but I think it's translatable to a lot of people who are working in this space and would be very useful if it hasn't been touched on explicitly. But a side question is, this is a wonderful resource. You've done amazing work to make this available. Are there things that we as a community can do, university press partners, library publishers, to promote this to our own community, but also these other groups that may find it useful? Is it word of mouth? Is it just tweeting the Google Drive link? What can we do to help promote this?
So my thoughts on that would be, we've identified maybe a half a dozen other potential constituencies. Let's figure out where these folks eat, sleep, congregate, and hang out there, right? I mean, there's an annual, there's a couple of annual meetings for Learned Society publishers. There's an annual meeting for digital humanities publishers, people. Sarah, what do we call people who manage digital humanities centers?
Yeah. I was mentioning to Mary Rose earlier that, we have someone from our Digital Scholarship Center going to DHSI, the Digital Humanities Summer Institute, and there are some other kind of similar programs, where they're actively talking about digital publishing, or the big DH, 2018, 2019, whatever it is. So, those would be maybe some forum to think about.
I also think, and Catherine, we're going to recruit you to be a author of a project management unit. Because I think the other way to,
Be careful what you ask
the other way to promote this is to keep it alive. And that was one of the major, we put together this curriculum, which was an enormous effort on behalf of a huge number of organizations and individuals, over the course of a year, really. And the idea was, not just to get a deliverable out there, but that we know that these things change so rapidly, and that the skills that we need today might not be exactly the same ones that we need tomorrow, and we don't want these to become stale or irrelevant over time. And so I think that's the other way to promote them, is to just ensure that this is a vibrant initiative and that it continues to grow and expand, and that that the community continues to add to it and develop it as a resource. Do the panelists have any other closing thoughts or comments?
Just that I'm impressed by all the work that you did. Sarah did a lot of work on this.
Yeah, I'd second that. I also think, it's interesting, I think, for all of us in the content module to have an opportunity to sort of actually think about what goes into, doing our jobs, and distill it down, and then communicate it out in a way that was understandable, where, often we're an echo chamber. I think that's typical with when you have a bunch of people in a room who kind of do the same thing or from the same industry. And this was a way to think about it and how to communicate it in a different way. And I think that was valuable. It was hard, but it was valuable.
So I reflected briefly when we started on what attracted us to the project. So I'll close by just reflecting really briefly on what I think we got out of it. Because, we contributed to it, but we learned things too. The first thing we learned was that it was a ton more work than we thought it was going to be. But and that is not a complaint, but it is a statement of fact. The second important thing that I think we learned is we had some of our preconceived notions attached, or challenged, some of our own biases challenged. And in the interest of time and a bunch of other things, I won't go into that in detail, but I can confirm that sacred cows make the best hamburger. So slay them. And then finally, I think that we left the process, or came to the other side of it, with an increased understanding or appreciation of publishing as a service to our own institutions. And that's probably something we could only learn from our library colleagues. And if you remember what I said before, this kind of brings it all full circle, because that's a really important lesson for university presses, since we're all for ways to demonstrate value to our own institutions.
Well, thank you all very much for coming this afternoon, and please join me in thanking our three panelists.